Hey everybody, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell, and welcome to the latest video in my ongoing analysis series of the MMORPG genre. Today we're going to be talking about subscriptions and whether or not subscription-based MMORPGs can still thrive in 2022. More importantly, though, the conversation is more about can new intellectual properties launch their games with subscription-based services and expect to survive and thrive in 2022 when comparing to all of the other things that are on the market and options that players have at their disposal, which go way beyond gaming these days because of a lot of stuff we're going to talk about in this episode. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel, of course. If you like what you hear and see here today, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for future content in my MMORPG analysis series, and don't forget to check out all the other stuff that happens here on YouTube because it is vast and it is varied. We do a lot of different things here. Don't forget you can also check the Discord link. Description text is down below. If you want to know more about what I'm working on with my wife and my brother with the world of the Weave and the Void, you can check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/wandering hermits and dive in with us there as we work on our 5th edition tabletop setting, point and click adventure game, and Dragonlance style series of fantasy novels. All right, without further ado, let's dive in to talk about subscription games in 2022 and whether or not they can actually exist. So I think when we can look at existing intellectual properties that have 20 or 30 years of history behind them. We're talking World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV as examples. These are a couple of big franchises that still have subscriptions and they still manage to keep a really healthy player base. Then we have games like EverQuest 1, EverQuest 2, which again we're dealing with franchises that are 15, 20 years old. We also have games like Star Wars: Old Republic and Lord of the Rings Online, which are really big intellectual properties that have a built-in audience. Also, Dungeons and Dragons Online should go in there as well. Now, a lot of these games have free-to-play options. I think all of those games on the list have a free-to-play option other than World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. Um, and all of those games have some sort of hybrid variation of free-to-play with a cash up with optional subscription. But you'll notice that out of that list, out of all the games that I just listed, only two still have a primary subscription based model. Even that model has changed dramatically over the past 10, 15 years since these games launched. So the question I have is whether or not a game coming out in 2022 can actually hope to survive if it's going to have a subscription based model as its monetization. So I'd like to point out before I dive into the heavy analysis of all the other services that people have at their disposal for subscriptions, looking at the sheer value of money, which from a transactional standpoint, a lot of players look at. They say, am I getting the value of that subscription? A lot of people look at, is the game big enough to support having enough content to keep me busy for 15, 12, $15 a month. In most cases, the discussions that I've seen, the data points that I've looked at, if a player is going to be diving in and playing an older game like, say, World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, they often feel like that subscription can be justified because they know that they're buying a pack and or they are paying a sub that allows them to play everything up to the most recent expansion, which means I can jump in, start paying that monthly sub, and play everything that the game has to offer up until the most recent content. And if that game has been out for 10, 15 years, then I've got 10 or 15 years worth of content that I can chew through. Looking at a new game, say New World is an example, which was not a subscription based game, but I'm using this as an example of a recent MMORPG that launched. That game launched and it had a lot of content for people to choose from: PvE, PvP, dungeons, crafting, harvesting, lots of variation, lots of different things to do. And despite that fact, despite the fact that it was buy to play, right, with no subscription, just buy to play, jump in and play, within the first 2 to 3 weeks, the Steam numbers had dropped in half. And some of that, of course, was just due to the honeymoon phase. Others was due to the bugs and other issues that were in the game. But the reality is that even a AAA game like New World, which launched with veteran individuals behind it and a ton of money behind it. That was a AAA game that couldn't keep players playing the game more than a few weeks before people started abandoning in vast numbers, excuse me. And you can look at a game like Crowfall, which is another game that was put together by industry veterans, which failed miserably to the point where they sold that intellectual property off because they couldn't figure out a way to bring it back from the brink. They anticipated having lots of numbers and just didn't happen. You can also look at a game like, say, Shroud of the Avatar, which sold 100,000 plus copies, and yet was never able to maintain more than a few hundred people playing at any given time. Steam numbers have been dramatic since the beginning. We saw that game go from having a team of nearly 40 people to within a few months after launch to cutting the team to half of that, and then with another few months after that, cutting the team in half even again, and then eventually getting to the point where it's been only one guy developing the game with a handful of subcontractors helping out. So we see all these games coming out by industry veterans, um, or AAA companies, which are expected to have big numbers. They sell 100,000 copies or more, and yet they can't retain those players, even on a buy to play or free to play model, which begs the question, if the industry can't support keeping people involved in games, even if it's just buy to play and free to play, what makes all of these little indie teams think that they're going to be able to maintain a subscription based MMORPG? Now, for some of the you who have known me for a while, you'll know that I was involved with the Saga of Leucemia before it was rebranded to Embers Adrift, and I was the driving force behind that being a subscription only model. However, even in my later years with that development cycle, if you'll remember a few years back, I started talking about hybridization and looking at doing something more along the lines of what Elder Scrolls Online does, and doing some sort of a weird hybrid model where you have a buy to play, a free to play, buy to play, and a subscription based option to give players lots of different options. Even I had begun to realize by that point that having a subscription only model was likely going to kill the game in the long run. I just don't think it is a viable option when you're looking at games that have 10 years of content or more behind them, because when people are looking for a value-based transaction, they're looking for something that they know they're going to get their money's worth out of. And if you're a brand new intellectual property and a brand new game that's coming out, you're just not going to be able to offer that, especially if you're a small indie team that's only got 2 or 3 content developers on your team and you've only been able to develop a handful of zones, a handful of dungeons, and a handful of quests. You don't have dozens to hundreds of zones and dungeons and quests for players to sink their teeth into because you didn't have $250 million and a team of 50 content developers working at your disposal. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's very difficult to achieve the level of content with a small indie team that's going to justify the purchase of a subscription for many players. Now, you can also do a very quick analysis of something like the Xbox Games Pass, which for my money, is the best value on the market right now. You pay 15-ish dollars a month and you get access to more than 100 games on the PC and the Xbox. Those are cross-platform. You can play them either on the console, on the PC, or if you have games that you have on the console, but you want to play them on your PC, you can play them via the cloud. You can also stream via your console. There's lots of crossplay there, and you get not only over 100 games in your library, there's always adding new games to that. You get all the Xbox Game Studios exclusive included in that subscription, plus you get deep discounts on all sorts of other games. So for the $15 a month equivalent that I'm paying one company, an indie game that expects me to spend $12 to $15 a month for their one lonely title, I can play hundreds of titles on the Xbox, and through that Xbox Games Pass, play them on my PC as well. So the value for me, and this is what I look at from a data standpoint, hundreds of games for $15 a month versus one game for $15 a month. The math just doesn't add up, which is one of the reasons why it is a very hard sell for games to expect players to want to pay a monthly subscription on top of the box price to play their game. Now, there are a variety of titles that are coming out. Let's look at one as an example. I know that Pantheon is an example a lot of people like to look at. that has stated in the past that they plan on doing a subscription-based model, but they haven't finalized that. Even Pantheon, as much reputation as it has, I think will be hard pressed to find enough players who will justify wanting to spend that monthly subscription day in and day out if the game isn't going to launch with hundreds of hours, if not more, thousands of hours worth of content. Because again, looking at every game that comes out these days, the way people play games anymore is completely different than it was 10, 15 years ago. People don't just play for, you know, they don't just play one game anymore. I have at my fingertips right now, I have mobile games, I have console games, Xbox, I got PlayStation, I've got PC, I've got browser games. I got games. I got games on Steam. I got games on GOG. I got games on Epic. I got games on the PlayStation. I got games on, I mean, every time I turn around, I'm getting, every single week, I'm getting 5, 6, 7 games freely given to me every single week that vie for my time. So the idea of paying a subscription to a game means that that game has to have something that's going to keep me involved for dozens of hours per week or more. I'm currently paying a subscription for 2 accounts in EverQuest 2. I also have a subscription to Star Wars: The Republic and a subscription to Lord of the Rings Online. I play those games with my brother, my wife, and my community. But I can also say that those subscriptions sometimes get turned off if I'm not playing those games for long periods of time. And I also have an Xbox Games Pass subscription. Um, but I don't subscribe to other games unless I know I'm going to be playing that game for long periods of time. Excuse my voice. I'm getting over COVID, so I'm a little crunky. Um, so just from a purely value-based standpoint, expecting players to spend $12 to $15 a month on your game and only your game means that you better have enough content to justify the players being able to put in hundreds of hours into your game. Because the first thing that happened in my example with New World was I got into the game, I played it, and within 30 hours, I was already hitting the point where I was rinsing and repeating content after 35 hours, and that was my cutoff point. I said I'm quitting the game at this point because I'm no longer having fun. You have to be able to provide players with literally hundreds of hours of gameplay to justify a subscription. If you're expecting someone to pay a box price and then a monthly subscription on top of that, there needs to be, and think about this for a minute, because New World launched with dozens of zones, dozens of dungeons, dozens of world zones and dungeons for players to explore through 60 levels, 50 or 60 levels worth of content. There was a lot of stuff there, and it couldn't keep people entertained. People were still bouncing out after 2 or 3 weeks because they'd seen it and they had already done it and they were bored of it. So you have to be able to have enough content, and that's going to be a really hard sell for an independent team who's been struggling to make a game for less than $10 million with a team of less than 20 people, especially if some of those people are part-time and not all of them are content creators. There's a lot of stuff to think about. You need to be able to have lots and lots of, just tons of zones, tons of dungeons, tons of content. Content is king. And if you don't have the content for players to play through, why would anyone want to pay a subscription to stay subscribed to your game when they're going to run out of things to do within the first month, if not the first 2 weeks of gameplay? Food for thought. I am finding it harder and harder to justify subscriptions as I get deeper into the new years, into the 2020s, especially as I get older because my time is limited and there are so many other great games that I want to play. Especially when we talk about great RPGs and single player games and console games and everything else. If I'm going to spend money on a subscription based game, it needs to be something that I know is going to provide my community with enough content that we can jump in and play 15, 20 hours a week minimum and do that for 3, 4, 5 months to get our money's worth out of it, which is why we constantly go back to the old games like Lord of the Rings Online, Star Wars: The Old Republic, EverQuest 1, EverQuest 2, because these games have lots and lots and lots and lots of content. Newer games don't. Newer games, when they launch, often only have 2 weeks of content and then you're done. And then they want you to wait until they patch or add an expansion or add new stuff. And yet, some of these companies have the gall to say that they want you to pay a subscription to support them while they're continuing to develop content. And it's like, no, you need to develop the content and then we'll support you. So it's one of those things where Are subscription-based games possible in 2022? I think that yes, they are, but I think it is heavily dependent on whether or not those subscription-based games can have enough content to compete with franchise MMORPGs that do have hundreds of hours of content to offer players in order to give them that value-based transaction that is equal to or greater than what they're going to get from an Xbox game subscription or beyond. And something else I want to talk about briefly at the end of this video, which like going over to this article talking about like all the different subscription services that people have, like Wank, Trade Coffee, NordVPN, Grammarly, Audible, Atlas VPN, MacKeeper, DataCamp, Burstoro, Paramount Plus, Discovery Plus, Hulu, Tidal, Netflix, Masterclass, Showtime, blah 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 blah. There are dozens of other subscription-based services out there that offer the individual, from a value-based perspective, hundreds of hours of entertainment compared to an MMORPG. And the reason we used to do this and feel okay about spending the money in MMORPGs all those years ago was because we didn't have all of those options. And we didn't have all of these other distractions and other things vying for our money. So in a time and place where people only have a limited amount of money to spend, is a subscription based game going to be the best thing for you? It's going to depend on you and your wallet, but at the end of the day, it does come down to, are you getting value out of that, and is that value worth the money you're paying? Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down below. Don't forget, like this video if you liked it, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for future MMO analysis content, and of course don't forget to join our Discord down below. Head over to our Patreon page if you want to learn more about the Weave and the Void. It's patreon.com/wandering hermits. And I will see everybody in the next episode. Peace.